Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time. My name is Vivian Crawford, and my co-host is former Pennsylvania State Representative Babette Josephs. Welcome, Babette.
My pleasure.
Conversations Across Time is the television show that invites you, the audience, to suppose what would happen if there were possible conversations between important historical figures from different time periods. The goal of Conversations Across Time is to introduce to you, our audience, the thought processes and strategic applications of immortals who are here this evening to discuss policies and issues which are relevant today. Tonight's guests are First Lady Abigail Adams.
It's a pleasure being here again. Thank you.
Thank you, First Lady, and Madam First Lady. And seated next to the First Lady is King Henry II. Welcome again, King Henry. Seated next to King Henry is Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Thank you so much, Justice Marshall, for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Now, when we talked last week, we had a bit of a discussion concerning the role of women and, in fact, the importance of women in terms of participating in the political process. You, Madam First Lady, were very interested in seeing that women had a say and had some involvement in the political process. Now, this many years later, as you see, there are women in many forms of government. I mean, our former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. And so I can imagine how that makes you feel to know that when the writing of the Declaration of Independence happened, you really wanted the inclusion of women. You wanted it to apply to all persons, not just men. So today, we are looking at some controversies that may be of interest, and that is, I mentioned last week I wanted us to talk about this. The National Football League, which is the NFL, is right now embroiled in a controversy that has to do with some very, very strange and archaic notions on behalf of men. There is a controversy that's going on right now concerning a football player who is alleged to have assaulted his fiancee, which is now his wife. I'd like to hear your opinion about that, because even though you lived during a time when women were considered property of their husbands, we know that that's not the type of relationship you had with your husband. Babette?
Well, not exactly alleged. I mean, I saw the video, unless they were actors. He punched her in the face and she passed out. So I expect that there was a fair amount of physical violence against women in your day. And how did you deal with that, and how did the women deal with that?
Well, I know that the former psychologist, Dr. Joyce Brothers, she referred to it as a super jock syndrome, when you have these big NFL monsters that they cannot control their aggression off the field. They have to take ownership of their behavior, and they have to be severely punished. Now, I am an advocate for married women's property rights. And under the law, married women did not exist. The husband, he could punch the woman, he could brutalize the children, he could starve the children. Yes, he could.
He could starve the children, because I was getting ready to say,
yes, he could.
As we know, your fellow panelist, King Henry, imprisoned his wife.
Yes.
And rightly so. She was a pain in the arse, just like this lady was a pain in the arse to her husband.
And he tried to assassinate his children.
Now, the current guys punched him in. I would have put her in the stock in New England.
You know what? You're a barbarian, and your sons should definitely have annihilated you. And
Madam First Lady,
And
you
my
might
wife tried to get him to do that.
wait a minute, I was getting ready to say you might be interested to know that they actually did try to kill their
Yeah.
father.
yes. They attempted to overthrow you.
This is not
didn't they,
your
King
ideal
Henry?
family.
Yes,
More
your
than-
sons, the Baron, and everybody hated you, and Eleanor.
And because
Yes.
my wife was a wench, and she continued to be a wench, and there's no
A
way
wench.
better a wench, and there's no way better to treat the people. Even though she thought she was high class and a queen, she acted like
she
a
was
wench.
a queen.
She was a queen.
I was Hillary before Hillary. Did you know that?
You were probably
I-
Eleanor before Eleanor. So what?
Yes. And you were just like Bill, fornicating with the wenches.
But
That's correct.
Lest we digress from
that's
the
correct.
issue
That's
of
correct.
Yes, let's get back to the.
lest we digress
But
from
Justice
the issue
Marshall
of process.
was always
I'm
Justice
interested to
Marshall.
know. I'm
For
interested.
Justice Marshall.
I'm interested in the characterizations and where it is true that under no circumstances should a man put his hands on a woman in that way. There is very much being made out of a small clip of information that has been made available to us and has been narrated to us. I'm also interested in the process as it has been somewhat reactive on the part of the National Football League, and I'm also interested in what that process is in place to protect. So it seems that the issues of what women have continued to experience as it relates to being an oppressed or brutalized or anything of that kind, where that's very relevant, I think it's also relevant to examine the processes that were used in moving some of these things forward. I find it
the
interesting.
NFL, the National Football League process, was like the ecclesiastical courts. They did what they thought was right without reference to the outside world. And so beating up a woman was not taken very seriously by the authorities in the NFL until the public started to see what was going on. And women in the public, who were also football fans, got a little upset.
But we can't overlook the fact that initially Ray Rice was suspended. I believe it was a 2-game suspension, and women's groups became very upset. Not just women were upset. That seemed a slap on the wrist for the behavior that had occurred. But
Which
the problem,
we saw her being dragged out of the elevator like a bag of
Well,
leaves.
actually, she was unconscious at the time.
Yes, right. But we couldn't figure out how she became unconscious somehow.
But here's what's interesting to me. Justice Marshall makes a very good point. That's about process.
Yes.
Because under the NFL guidelines, the commissioner actually is the judge and jury concerning what type of punishment should be meted out when you have an infraction by a player. And so as judge and jury, the decision was a 2-game suspension. I'm curious because when Justice Marshall talks about the process, if we want to go back now and revisit the process, that, and you know, you're an attorney, Babette, you know that smacks of double indemnity. I mean, it's really because he's already been punished, even though we didn't like the punishment. He's already been punished under their guidelines. So if indeed he wasn't arrested and there were no criminal charges brought against him, I don't know that the NFL gets to go back and have a second bite at the apple, which I'm not saying that their decision was correct to begin with, but there was a decision that was made, a 2-game suspension. Now they want to come back because of the press and revisit it. I think that the NFL's handling of this has been shameful. There's no question about that. But the problem that I have is, as Justice Marshall articulated, there's a process, and the process that was in place was he was given a punishment.
I also believe that the teams have some role in these punishments, and that process started when the video where you could actually see the man punch out his then fiancee when that video was seen, and the team to which he belonged, Ravens,
Yes, yes.
then also suspended him. So that was a different process.
Okay. I suppose my question goes to, under the NFL guidelines, he was punished with the 2-game.
Yes, I
Suspension.
agree with you. I
And
see your
so
point.
then now it's the NFL guidelines, as I understand it, it's the NFL guidelines that they're now saying we want to revisit this, and now you're suspended indefinitely. I don't like what he did. I simply, like the justice points out, have a respect for process. And I think, quite frankly, that maybe Roger Goodell should go.
I agree with you. I totally do, and I totally feel that he's on the way out. Condoleezza Rice would be an excellent NFL commissioner
Now, that's
because
former
she's making
secretary.
all the smart moves. She knows the game. She's proved it. She's been quietly lobbying for it. And she said it would be a dream job. And I really feel it would be an opportunity for Condoleezza, you know, as a
Well,
woman
I wanna
leader,
let
to
our audience
demonstrate
know.
in a very shabby arena where, you know, values and morals are secondary to money.
Well, I want our audience to understand that you were talking about former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice.
Yes, yes.
And so, and there's no question that she has said years ago that she was interested in being the NFL commissioner.
The dream
So,
job, yes.
Yeah.
But
So,
if we followed the principle that I set forward about trials and courts, and one of the compromises I made with the church was I allowed them to try some of their clerics, but if they were found guilty, I would have to met out the or my courts would have to met out the punishment, because that the punishment the church had was rest of nothing. They might flog them or
So then
defrock
they
them.
never found anybody guilty, I would
No,
think.
because there are two sets of laws.
The point is, you're quite correct in this process, because once the commissioner of this league suspended him, and then the team dismissed him, and then they suspended him further after it's punishment after the fact, I would never stand for that as someone who believed in the rule of law, and I'm sure Justice Marshall would have some opinion about that too.
Well, it truly seems to me that if you are going to react according to your process in one instance and then revise that reaction based on public opinion, it seems that one could use one's purview in a bit more organized fashion.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that probably enough attention has been given to this one particular person, and what needs to happen is that everybody in sports, everybody in the world, has to take violence against women more seriously.
As do
we-
they, the process with which these things
Yes.
are considered and taken forward.
I agree.
And I think I'd like us to at least after we have to take a break now, and after the break, I'd like us to come back to this, because I do think that there is some rethinking that needs to happen on behalf of organized sports, period, not just the NFL. So please come back after the break, and we'll take this conversation up about the NFL. Thank you. And welcome back. King Henry, during the break, you mentioned something that I thought was worth sharing with our audience. Please.
Well, besides a football player Rice, who was really thrown out of the league, there are at least 2 players playing now who have been convicted of beating their wives, and they appealed the case, which is the process. But while the case is under appeal, one team chose not to suspend them, the other team just sat them out 1 game. And of course, we have the example of Mr. Peterson, who plays for the Vikings, who abused his 4-year-old child.
2 children.
Tortured him.
And he's still playing. So the process, no one knows what
2
the
children.
process is. And if I were adjudicating this, although I was not an advocate of not hitting women, in my time, but if I were adjudicating it today, I would set up a better process where these gentlemen couldn't play while they were already convicted of the crime.
And are they collecting their money too?
Yes.
How sick this is.
If I may, Ms. Crawford, there are a number of different issues that appear to me, and as you make reference to Peterson, who from Minnesota, the Vikings, who was alleged to have, who
Use
admitted
corporal punishment.
who admitted using corporal punishment on his son. The characterizations of that indeed exceed process. It seems that the outcries and the characterizations by the good lady Abigail concerning a brutality and such, these are different reflections of how it is that children should be raised. And what we see here is the surge of public opinion littering the due process of a situation. The characterizations and the creation by the NFL of specific classifications for these players to allow them to retain what in fact is rightly theirs as star players. They contribute to the value and the income of the National Football League.
But I'm sorry. Please go on, because I do have a question, but I'll let you finish.
Well,
sorry.
my point was that there are different levels of process, and when you allow the surge of public opinion to affect that process, then it speaks to a weak process or a weak usage of that process. So, but there are different characterizations, and I think it's important to note that these individuals are Black and African American,
Yes.
and as these particular characterizations of barbarism and all of this go forward, it serves to feed certain stereotypes that in fact may or may not be actually true in these situations. So we must be careful when we're allowing public opinion to surge and allow media characterizations of particular things that actually, if you'll pardon the pun, color the issues.
Now, there's 2 things
that's true.
about that I find interesting that you just mentioned. A, that the majority of in fact, the only people that we're hearing about are African American. And
What happened to the white guys that beat up their wives?
Because
There's
we certainly
plenty of
know that
them.
They don't end up in the news, it seems.
Yeah,
Well, there's plenty of them. We know that.
exactly. And then there's also that the commissioner of the NFL has made a decision and in fact had a press conference to say that he had appointed a blue ribbon panel of experts. Now, I'm sitting here.
How sad it is.
I'm sitting here as an African American woman, and I am insulted that on this blue ribbon panel, there's not one person of color.
Really.
One person of color.
It would seem that estrogen would have been the prerequisite.
That
It
would
would
help.
seem that instead of collagen. Is
Yes.
that right? Or pigment.
Yes.
And so the NFL, I agree with you, First Lady Adams. I think that it is time for new leadership with the NFL because they're just tone deaf. And to even come out and have a press conference and say, I've appointed a panel, and not even have the wherewithal to look at the panel you've appointed and understand that they're going to advise you on how you should interact with the only players that seem to be in the picture right now, African American men, and you now have 4 women for white women examining the problem. So that is a personal, I mean, I didn't get a phone call. So, I mean, you're looking for an expert? Come on.
I didn't receive any, did you?
Did you? No. Did you get the memo? No.
No.
So
They probably didn't have your cell number.
That's probably what it is. But so that is problematic, and it is also problematic that there has been this inconsistency in process in terms of how this problem is dealt with. So,
yeah, I mean, it seems to me that right away
They waver.
well,
They fluctuate.
other infractions get treated much more severely. If you have taken an illegal drug, you're out of the game for many games. If you beat another human being to a pulp, so long as that's somebody in your family, particularly a woman, well, they needed to.
Do you think they favor the super jock, and they are a little bit more lenient with him?
If public opinion did nothing except make all the crimes that were serious,
Yes.
that would be a help.
well, I can understand that public opinion plays here, but I have another question, and that is, are they so dismissive? Was the NFL so dismissive because it was people of color?
Very likely.
Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, did they make the decision that this woman's life was not as valuable because she's a woman of color? Are they saying in some stereotypical way that that's how these folks act? I mean,
I think so. I think so.
I'm glad to hear that, because I've been thinking that for a long time. I've been watching this and
because I've been thinking, where are the white guys a long time? Long time. What happened to that?
Yes.
When the first stories about rape in the military came out, it was all black soldiers.
Yes.
What happened to the white guys that rape women? What happened to them?
Again, we're looking at matters where these individuals, they make exorbitant sums of money, it is true,
Yes.
but it does not disqualify them from being oppressed. The process and the arbitrary nature of how some things are publicized and how some things are not is not an NFL issue. It is an issue of our system, and it is incumbent upon those who are interested in change to apply themselves to the places that can affect that change. So to have an NFL player or anyone subject to double jeopardy just because people are not satisfied with the first punishment seems to me an inadequate use of process. And then to revise one's procedure concerning that process in the middle of it seems to disenfranchise even further those who have already been subject to.
Maybe, but it's not a court of law.
Well, it is not
It's
a court
a
of
bunch
law,
of
it is a court of
athletes.
business.
It's a bunch of
Making
guys.
a lot of money.
It's actually a bunch of owners who are controlling the lives of a bunch of athletes who make a portion of the money that the owners make. If you write a check to someone for $2 million, the account from which that check is drawn needs to
It's
be
larger than $2 million.
into the focus as well.
And there we have it. Because as you said, Madam First Lady, that there was a question that they're still drawing their salaries. Well, what about the NFL? What about the NFL owners? Because all they're looking at, they're businessmen, and
It's all about money.
It's all about money. And you know what it reminds me of, Babette? Does it remind you of the gladiators when we had Spartacus here?
No, I was thinking more actually of what's-his-face who had to sell his basketball team. So sometimes those guys get it too, if
Talking about Sterling?
Sterling.
Well, the good news for women is that it's good business for the NFL to pay attention to you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they have a lot of women fans.
They do.
And they might get a woman commissioner,
Which
would
I hope
certainly
so.
help them.
That's what Mrs. First Lady wanted to do.
Yeah, I would choose a different one, but
Well, yes,
I'm a
Babette,
Democrat.
you and I, you are. I mean, I hear that, and I understand. And Madam First Lady, I do understand you as an 18th century feminist would think that Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, would be, and I think she's certainly qualified. But you know, I just have an issue with Condoleezza Rice. And since we're talking about this, I might as well. I mean, come on, I'm a lefty. What do you expect? And I said to people before about Condoleezza Rice and Clarence Thomas and other people of color of her ilk that they suffer from something. They suffer from a disease, a malady. And that malady I term as the delusion of inclusion. They seem to think that they are a part of the power, and they are not. They're pawns. So,
Yes.
Well, to be fair, the same could have been said of me.
No.
But
Maybe
No,
you're
no way.
successful.
it is certainly the ones who involve themselves in the process. There are a number of controversies that I suffered from those who, again, wanted to take militant state statutes and all of this. And the process is what it is that allows for the organized solution of problems.
Well, first of all, let us not overlook the fact that when you were at the NAACP, when you were chief counsel for the NAACP, you did have at least to present the argument to the NAACP that separate but equal was inherently unequal before you could even get to the Supreme Court. Because at that time, separate but equal was the rule of law, and you and your mentors, Charles Houston and William Hastie, felt that separate but equal was in itself a problem.
It was an interesting exercise to uproot the notion of many in the NAACP that separate but equal was in fact a legitimate terminology at all. Separate is in fact inherently unequal. And I believe that our conversation, along with some of the momentum of our success, contributed to our being able to persuade our colleagues in the correct direction.
Well, I mean, you know, the justice is being so modest because there is no way that you and Charles Houston, who was the dean of the Howard Law School, and William Hastie, who followed him as dean of the Howard Law School, and you, who had proceeded and won so many cases, and I don't think anyone has ever met your record as to how many arguments you presented before the Supreme Court and won. So that when you say that you had to persuade the NAACP, I think that they realized that if indeed they did not give in on this point, which you turned out to be right, you guys turned out to be right, that they could not afford to lose the likes of a Thurgood Marshall and a Charles Houston and a William Hastie. These were premier legal scholars.
Naturally, I am quite taken by how my contributions have been characterized, but I would say that all of my success I would attribute to having embraced the correct concept. And that is that if you approach a problem or an inequity on its own terms and change those terms to your terms using the system, you have the best chance of making indelible change.
And with that, we find ourselves at the end of this stimulating conversation. And I just, on behalf of myself and Babette and the entire Conversations Across Time crew, I just want to thank you. You have no idea what this has meant, and it is so refreshing to have such guests and to be able to explore your thought processes. This has just been wonderful, is not even the right term. I think Babette could probably come up with something that's certainly a lot more eloquent.
I don't know.
But I do so much enjoy having had you here. We look forward to maybe having you back sometime in the future. Justice Marshall, please, anytime you deign to meet with us, we're going to want to have you here.
As my immortality allows.
And King Henry, thank you so much. And First Lady, Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you did for women before anyone even knew that there was a problem.
Oh, thank you so much. And I do appreciate your kindness for saying that.
Thank you. And so Babette, I guess, once again, Babette and I are saying this has been Conversations Across Time. And we look forward to you joining us next week for another interesting and stimulating conversation across time.
Conversations across time. Conversations across